Entrainment Technology with Adam Entrainment Technology with Adam Trombly The Solari Report August 18, 2011. Catherine Austin Fitts Introduction. Okay, on to Entrainment Technology, Subliminal Programming and Nanchal Manipulation. We're going to talk for about an hour and a half on this one. I think this is a very important topic. My goal is extremely modest. I want you to simply understand that this type of invisible influence and manipulation is going on, and you need to take that into account in your day-to-day life. You can protect yourself from it, but the thing that helps you the most is simply knowing that it does exist and knowing that it's very pro-table for some people to use it in a variety of ways. Exclamation mark. I started to think about entrainment technology and subliminal programming, although I didn't use those words, when I was in Wall Street. Many of you have heard me tell this story. In 1984, I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear, and they were talking about the kinds of technology that were being rolled out on television. It scared me to death. From that point on, I've never owned a television. With one exception, a decorator brought one for me when I worked for the Bush administration. And I promptly gave it away as soon as I left the Bush administration. I've watched over a lifetime the use of subliminal and invasive technology get stronger and stronger. I had a practice, both when I worked in the Bush administration and then at Hamilton Securities, the company I started after I left the Bush administration, cleaning up enormous Nanchal frauds. And the more I worked at cleaning up really huge Nanchal frauds, billions and billions, and then trillions of dollars, I could not explain how some of it could happen without different kinds of dirty tricks, including this kind of technology. I've talked a lot about control less, and I think that was important, but I came to see this kind of technology as something that was clearly involved. When I ended up litigating with the federal government, I was a target of physical harassment, and in that process I really said, I've got to research more, I've got to talk to private investigators, I've got to talk to people who work in the covert operations of a variety of different government agencies or private agencies, and learn a lot more about this, and I tried to do it. Exclamation mark. During that period between 2004 and 2006, I spoke to audiences in New Zealand, in several countries in Europe and in the United States, and I used to survey the audiences to get a feel for who was in the audience and why they were there, and to make sure my speech really addressed what they came to get. What I discovered is that no matter what country I was in, my audience typically were people 90% or greater who described themselves as not watching television. That was my audience, people who didn't watch TV. And I think that's not unconnected to the conversation we're going to have tonight. Sure enough, at the worst part of the litigation I met Adam, who very generously educated me about how to manage numerous dirty tricks that I was dealing with. Adam is a scientist, a physicist, an inventor. It will embarrass him. I always say this, he's absolutely brilliant. He's currently the director of Project Earth. His focus is on zero-point energy and healing the world and the environment, including with the use of new energy technology. He was the co-sponsor of the Phoenix Rising conference I attended in Switzerland last year, which was so inspiring for me. They had a panel on energy technology, and then we had a workshop on how we could integrate it at a grassroots level in a decentralizing way. He's much more inspiring on energy technology. However, he's kindly agreed to be with us this evening to talk about entrainment technology and subliminal programming. That's one of the technologies we have to get out of the way if we're going to get to new energy technology. See, Austin Fitts. So, let's begin. What is entrainment technology? Adam Trombly. Entrainment technology basically is the technology that exploits a neurological function called frequency following response. And frequency following response was discovered in the earlier part of the 20th century, and in terms of this type of entrainment was a matter of when the brain hears a repetitive pattern. It can be a repetitive pattern of words, it can be a repetitive cadence of rhythm, or in modern times it can be a repetitive acoustic sound coming across the loudspeaker. It can be in a certain wave form, a certain frequency. The brain will follow that sound. The brain will follow that sound whether it's monaural or binaural or surround sound. The brain will fall into rhythm with that sound. That's what frequency following response is about. It's kind of a natural tendency that our brains have, a proclivity our brains have. And basically, in the early 1930s when the Nazi government was taking power in Germany, basically they created a big stadium in Nuremberg. Albert Spiro was the architect, and it was very intentionally acoustically designed to augment and enhance alpha entrainment. This is one of the most important RST examples of mass mind control. Because what the German scientist community had discovered was, if you played alpha waves to patients who were having problems with their nervous system or psychosis or whatever, or even if they were just anxious, if you played alpha waves to these people they would become calm. Their brains would fall into a rhythm with the alpha waves. It would adjust their body chemistry in proportion to that. They would feel relaxed, and open and therefore more suggestible, which is a part of that, what happens. And so, they were able to get thousands of soldiers to line up in neat little rows and listen to Adolf Hitler blabber for hours and listen to all these other speakers go on as they stood there in the heat with perfect attention, because they were completely entrained. It was a remarkable demonstration of the power of this technology on a mass scale, but it was very, very primitive compared to what we're seeing today. See, Austin Fitts, when URST sat me down before a TV set and said that entrainment got you in a state of pleasure, and that made you open and susceptible to subliminal programming. But subliminal programming is different. I kind of think this is a 1-2 punch. Is that fair to say? Adam Trombly, yes, indeed it is. See. Austin Fitts, so, subliminal programming would be what? Adam Trombly, subliminal programming is kind of the intermodulation, if you would, of the signal that we get entrained with. So, here's the thing, you're sitting there relaxed in front of your TV, and you've just been watching your favorite TV show. You have a DVR and you don't want to watch the commercial, but 2 commercials into this, you're discovering that you're watching this commercial as if it's something you've always wanted to see. That's a perfect example of how entrainment in L traits our lives. Basically, this entrainment process gets us to relax our attention and relax in a certain way so we're not weary, we're not in GHT or IT syndrome. We're not being very discriminating at all, because that discriminating faculty has kind of been relaxed away. So we're sitting there and then they ash a screen in front of our eyes. This is the way it started in the 50s in television. They would ash a screen in front of people's eyes, like it would be a card that somebody would hold up that would say, buy such and such a product. I don't want to mention any product because I don't want to have anybody say. See, Austin Fitts, well, there was a famous one of them doing the test in the movie theater where it said, buy Coke, and then everybody rushed out and bought Coke. Adam Trombly, that's very true. There were a bunch of tests like that. Actually, somebody did their dissertation on it. Basically, what they discovered was that they could just ash a couple of frames of a movie, and it was not enough to linger in consciousness so that you knew that they had said, buy Coke. Aren't you thirsty now? Drink Coke. Those are the kinds of things that they did initially. Or, wouldn't you really have a Buick? We could have a good laugh just going through the commercials back then. The fact of the matter is, there were these weird things that would ash across the screen and then people noticed. The marketing department nightly noticed an uptick in sales and they said let's do more of this stuff. So now, one time somebody screwed up and they put way too many frames of this rather famous commercial and there it was and it said, you must buy this product. This was in primetime news, and everybody said, what was that? So there were hearings, even back then. It's funny, even before computers, people had telephones. Buckminster Fuller used to say, it was our RST true, real-time response network ability. The telephone was used a lot by people, politically, back then. We used to pick up our phones and call our senators and our congressmen. We actually acted like responsible members of our democracy. The fact of the matter is that, we really have a situation on our hands right now. We're being told who to vote for, we're being told what products to buy, and even though back in the 50s they had these things ashing across the screen, which were cardboard with black writing on them, and they were a couple of frames, now we've got a whole other level of evolution of it. But they made it against the law. So it is literally against the law to use subliminals in advertising. But the people who are enforcing the law don't even have the tools to know when it's happening because it is so sophisticated now, and it involves a combination, as you said, the 1-2 punch, of entrainment of putting everybody into a relaxed state of receptivity. And you tweak that a little bit and you also stimulate the buying impulse, which is the certain kind of pleasure that we get when we spend money. And you get people to do this thing because you say, I want everybody to vote for so and so. And so you make a very pleasant feeling associated to a picture that's actually in mesh with an additional picture on your television. So there's a picture you don't cognize seeing, and that's the subliminal. And it says in English, depending on the demographic that's being broadcast to, it says the words that they want you to do. They command you basically. They program us to do what they want us to do. It's weird to say this, because we've been involved in researching this for so many years. It sounds like science fiction to some people, but it is just an extension of what was going on in the 50s, in Nazi Germany in the 30s and the 40s, all the way through the war. They used them in concentration camps, and coordinated it with their chemical assault on people's will, which is like fluoride poisoning, etc. But I'll stop there. See, Austin Fitz, we're going to get to that. But I want to make sure we touched on the Russians. The Russians in the 60s were the RST to use this as a weapon, weren't they? Adam Trombly, well, yes they were. It was a serendipitous discovery. Some high school kids in United Kingdom who were toying with an early radio set in their lessons, and one of the young men turned the dial down to an extremely low frequency area. Then they started hearing this repeated pattern. It sounded like a woodpecker. And the realization, when the signal analysis was done later on, was that the former Soviet republics were actually broadcasting entrainment signals electromagnetically through the air, and the people who discovered it realized it was actually a very sophisticated technology. They were exploiting something that they had discovered with their excellent scientists, I must say. They discovered that the brain and the nervous system that human beings have, and even the water molecules in our blood, can respond to certain frequencies and certain wavelengths at very low amplitude, relatively speaking. They don't have to blast you with really loud electromagnetic signal. It's such a weak signal, it's almost impossible to describe on the one hand, but if you tuned it properly and you know what you're doing, and believe me, somebody knows what they're doing because we've been watching the sophistication of this in the last 20 years, it's just mind-boggling how it's increased. See, Austin Fitz, I'm trying to remember the name of that documentary of the birds. Birds have the ability to literally navigate as Auk through resonance and through literally a shared intelligence by resonating with each other. It's called wing migration. When we were watching I said, Adam, is this how humans communicate? In other words, do we also resonate with each other and with the Earth this way? And we were talking about that and the extent to which this kind of technology not only interferes with that, but can cause us to believe we're resonating with each other when we're not. We're resonating with something that's fake. Adam Trombly, sure, absolutely. That's fair to say. I ran into some of my colleagues at a conference and we started talking about entrainment. This was a long time ago, and two of them said we've been studying this and the Republican Party is using entrainment in a lot of their political commercials, and it's being used to great effect. I was very interested in that and I asked if there is anything else? This is before I knew hardly anything about it. They said, this is happening. They are stimulating pleasure feelings relative to their candidate, and revulsion feelings relative to the opposition. They were concerned because they said as it becomes more and more sophisticated this is going to be a devastatingly powerful tool. There are people who have been watching this and they are a very tight-knit group of people and they are dispersed throughout the scientific community. There are a lot of academic institutions doing this, but it isn't their primary job. See, Austin Fitz, no university will encourage this kind of publication. Adam Trombly, I don't know if no university will, but I haven't been there if there is one. Once you discover this, there is this kind of intelligent manipulative mind control kind of agenda going on when you discover that we are all, to a certain degree, being played on a day-to-day basis, then you realize it. I'll be lecturing in Europe, or you'll be lecturing somewhere and people will say, why does it seem like people in the United States are asleep? Well, I know it's because we have the most sophisticated entrainment in the world. We have entrainment that is mind-boggling and it's coordinated in all sorts of ways. Certain people were shocked and dismayed to discover that for the first time in the Democratic Party's history, during the Obama campaign, entrainment was used heavily, including during his big auditorium and stadium presentations. It's very tempting to do this because you can keep people's attention, you can get people to be receptive. See, Austin Fitz, I have to read you a question that came in today. Wow, what great guests you're having on the Solari Report. I have a question for Adam Trombly. Surely some people are more susceptible to entrainment technology than others. Are some people more resistant to the effects of these subliminal messages, and what traits allow these people to be so? There was a heavy-duty campaign of subliminal messaging to get Obama elected. I would watch some of his speeches, and some of those huge crowds looked just like people in the fundamentalist mega church, totally mesmerized. It was freaky, scary. My friends and I often ask why we didn't fall for the sales pitch, and didn't vote for him, including some who were lifelong Democrats. I remember years ago I would see ads for high-interest savings accounts in Iceland. I never would invest in one because I knew it was too good to be true. Is it that some have good critical thinking skills, or am I just getting more cynical in my mature years? Adam Trombly, Catherine and I were just talking about this earlier today, weren't we? Yes, some people are more resistant, just like some people are more resistant to hypnosis. There seems to be certain genetic proclivities regarding that. It also has to do with how much tap water you're drinking, for example. You're much more suggestible. And the reason for that is fluoride. Fluoride was used in Auschwitz to make people more passive, make them impotent, and make them sterile. We have this poison in our water that makes people impotent and sterile, and then we have the big pharma who is selling lots and lots of erectile dysfunction medicine, etc. And a huge industry for people who have difficulty-bearing children because they're sterile. This is all a part of the same mentality. How do you control your market? How do you control your population? How do you control the response vectors of the targets you're addressing? These are very real issues that are considered in those terms by the people who are doing this. See, Austin Fitz, I'll tell you one thing. When all the Obama stuff was rolling out during the campaign, I'm basically a money person. I spent my time in the federal government, or when our company was financial advisor to the federal government, I do the numbers. I understand how the money works. Whether it's the math of time, or whether it's the math of money and budgets, I know Obama was saying a whole bunch of stuff he didn't have the power to deliver, and was not economically feasible in the current framework. I just knew. One of the things I say is if you pay attention to the nuts and bolts of money and the time involved, it's pretty easy to LTER out the lies and protect yourself. Adam Trombly, it's not rocket science once you realize what's happening. If you just start feeling all warm and fuzzy towards a candidate that you really don't like, and you know you don't like them, then you know there's a problem. I've had it happen. I've fallen into that more than once. Sometimes I recommend to people to keep a journal. Just a little pad of paper even, and notice when you suddenly feel like buying a certain type of shampoo when they know that they would never put on their head. The idea of how sophisticated it is extraordinary. There are certain things that the powers that be that just don't want people to even think about. Like free energy, or a cure for cancer that's real instead of brutalizing people with endless chemocide, things like that. Your listener's question is really important. I want to loop right back to her question because I don't feel like I fully articulated something. Yes, there are some people who are more subject to this than others. You have friends, it sounds like. And one of the ways we mutually immunize medicine, etc. And a huge industry for people who have difficulty-bearing children because they're sterile. This is all a part of the same mentality. How do you control your market? How do you control your population? How do you control the response vectors of the targets you're addressing? These are very real issues that are considered in those terms by the people who are doing this. See, Austin Fitz, I'll tell you one thing. When all the Obama stuff was rolling out during the campaign, I'm basically a money person. I spent my time in the federal government, or when our company was financial advisor to the federal government, I do the numbers. I understand how the money works. Whether it's the math of time, or whether it's the math of money and budgets, I know Obama was saying a whole bunch of stuff he didn't have the power to deliver, and was not economically feasible in the current framework. I just knew. One of the things I say is if you pay attention to the nuts and bolts of money and the time involved, it's pretty easy to LTER out the lies and protect yourself. Adam Trombly, it's not rocket science once you realize what's happening. If you just start feeling all warm and fuzzy towards a candidate that you really don't like and you know you don't like them, then you know there's a problem. I've had it happen. I've fallen into that more than once. Sometimes I recommend to people to keep a journal. Just a little pad of paper even, and notice when you suddenly feel like buying a certain type of shampoo when they know that they would never put on their head. The idea of how sophisticated it is extraordinary. There are certain things that the powers that be that just don't want people to even think about. Like free energy, or a cure for cancer that's real instead of brutalizing people with endless chemocide, things like that. Your listener's question is really important. I want to loop right back to her question because I don't feel like I fully articulated something. Yes, there are some people who are more subject to this than others. You have friends, it sounds like. And one of the ways we mutually immunize each other is to say, did you notice I suddenly started feeling really good about so and so? And you say, yes, I noticed that. Isn't that weird? And you think, I must be listening to TV. And that's one of the ways that you remain more immune to a community. See, Austin Fitz, it's so important to have friends that are grounded. Adam Trombly, I'm so grateful to have you as a friend too. See, Austin Fitz, I'm alive thanks to you. So, there we go. Before we go to delivery mechanism, I want to talk about the positive uses. One of the reasons we get to understand all of this stuff is there is such a thing called entrainment and it can be used for the positive. It doesn't have to be used for the negative. Adam Trombly, certainly, when it was RST researched in Germany in the late 1930s and late 1920s, the RST initial use in 1929 in Munich, it was RST researched for therapeutic benat. For example, in the United States, the chief engineer for NBC in New York, a guy named Bob Monroe, who also was an acoustic engineer who loved developing high systems of his own, after putting test tones trying to ND his sweet spot of his laboratory stereo system, he found himself going into altered states of consciousness, which he really didn't understand. He contacted a psychiatrist and neurophysiologist from Yale, Dr. Lee Sinella, and asked him, "Excuse me doctor, I think I'm going mad. I am having these really wild things happening with my attention." Immediately, Dr. Lee EU out and they met, and Lee said, "No, actually, I believe that you are responding to alpha entrainment because the signal you're playing basically falls into that range, and that you're in an altered state of consciousness because alpha entrainment changes your neurochemistry and you will be in an altered state. Sometimes you'll be in a more intelligent and alert state even." So Bob began to experiment with this and created the Monroe Institute. I did some work there, and a bunch of people have done work there, and it was one of the most remarkable and powerful technologies I've ever seen. I saw people going from really amazingly dissociative states to really open and intelligent states within 4 or 5 days. I always wish that we could play states within 4 or 5 days. I always wish that we could play those kinds of things at the United Nations or the Congress instead of whatever it is that's making them so stupid. Please play something else. Change the music. See, Austin Fitz, I discovered something today. When I get hit, or I do something that involves a lot of entrainment subliminal programming, one of the things I do to recuperate is I lie down on my QRS, and I found out today that's what you do, too. We should explain what a quantum resonance system is. Adam Trombly, there were 2 doctors in Germany and I met with one of them in November of 1980. I was introduced to him by Hans Nieper. His name is Dr. Koenig, and he and a colleague of his were 2 of the RST people in Germany who were reviving the research regarding magnetic therapeutics for human beings. There was another gentleman I had just met, a former Luftwaffe engineer, a wonderful guy, a teddy bear of a human being, one of the nicest people I have ever met. He had discovered that water molecules respond at very low amplitude signal to a very specific kind of waveform. And we all had this lunch where he communicated to Dr. Koenig about this waveform, and how you could make a magnetically therapeutic map, for example, that would operate at mere microtestlates, a very weak magnetic eld, and would get all the water molecules resonating and help you actually disentrain from the entrainment that we're constantly subjected to, because we are constantly subjected to it, for example, over the harness of your house even. We discovered that that happens. Exclamation mark. The QRS basically is a therapeutic device that has been researched in Germany since 1980 and developed and is used on the International Space Station to help maintain a certain kind of electromagnetic integrity in the cells, which tends to get undermined in space. The red blood cells start getting sticky, and basically this induces mild resonance and helps the cells have a slight negative charge on the red blood cells. It's incredibly therapeutic and it's perfectly non-invasive. The FDA has acknowledged it as a therapeutic device and it's called the QRS. It's very important to know about. Except no substitutes. There are several people out there that are trying to sell things and saying they are just as good, but they don't use the right waveform and therefore they aren't nearly as effective. You know, and I know from using this, if you're feeling particularly dragged out and entrained, this is something that actually will snap you out of it. It's amazing. Your blood oxygenates better, your whole body oxygenates better. There's hardly enough I can say about it. It helped save my life, I know that. See, Austin Fitz, me too. Adam Trombly, relative to entrainment in particular, this is really a very powerful device because the water molecule is one of the primary mediums that's being massaged through entrainment because it's so polar, it's easy to program once you know what you're doing. Believe me, there are people who do know what they're doing. What the QRS does is it erases the water memory. It just clears it so that all these subliminal patterns which are being held in your body, and even in your cerebral spinal UID and in your brain, to a certain degree by water molecules having a certain orientation and evoking certain synaptic responses etc., in the brain. The fact is that this basically clears that. It's remarkable. It's like a self-liberation tool. See, Austin Fitz, listening to Bach. Well, I do, it really clears it. Let's jump to delivery mechanisms. There are an unbelievable number of ways that this stuff can be delivered. We're not going to talk about them all tonight, but let's break it down between the technologies that are targeted at large groups versus smaller groups and the individual. We'll talk about some of what it dovetails with, and then we'll talk about the financial applications. So let's look at the large groups. We have MP3s, CDs, DVDs, radio, TV, internet, and billboards. So I will just describe that as media, and maybe if you could talk a little bit about how media works and what you think are the important things for people to understand in that area. Adam Trombly, well, I think it's really important to understand that there are more and more people who now have relatively sophisticated televisions. They have good stereo, they have high-resolution video, but at the same time that's true, every time we turn one of these things on, there's a constant carrier background entrainment that's going on in every TV show. Some people think this is nay and a good thing to do, because for example, you can be made to have more concentration while you're watching a show. Not necessarily intellectual discriminative faculty, but more attention directed in a certain way. In other words, focused where somebody want you to focus your attention. So, the way the media uses this again is to sell, to control markets. It's to calm mass panic. Those seem like good things to do. And sometimes, I'm sure there are people who feel like we don't want insurgency. So since we don't want insurgency, let's control the mind of the population. So it's over your radio broadcast, it's on your television broadcast. It doesn't mean you lose sovereignty over your nervous system, but the way we maintain sovereignty over our nervous system is to be aware of this. As we said before, if you start feeling differently than you know you should be feeling, and you need to be an informed member of the democracy in the RST place, too. This is another way of combating it. We started reading about Barack Obama, and how even as a state representative, he didn't exactly fulfill his promises frequently. Somebody at the New York Times redirected my attention, after I recommended him to my readers, and said you really need to research this. I suddenly realized that I had somehow or other had become entrained the RST time I heard him speak in 2004. So this is a very interesting thing. The way it's used is to make you or me or any of the listeners out there, pliable and pliant, so there are ashes on your TV screen, for example, which are in a certain rhythm. You can be entrained not just through acoustic response, but the brain can also be entrained through the optical response. So, optical pulsation is coupled with audio pulsation to get the brain into a certain state of mind. See, Austin Fitts. So, where does it come in? If you look at the person making the TV show, they're not doing it. Does it get overlaid on top of it on the signal? Adam Trombly, let's say most producers are unaware of it. There are some producers who might be capable of getting this done at the production level, but this comes mainly through the big networks in a kind of coordinated effort, which has frustrated a number of people I've known in the media over a number of years, because the control room became more and more an isolated place, in a certain sense. So, there are pieces of equipment there that nobody has any idea why they are there, except for one or two people who are upper management. And they may not even know why they are really there. Someone came in from some government agency, or somebody came in and said you need this new piece of equipment. What we see is this incredible intermodulation. It isn't just a simple waveform. You really need sophisticated spectrum analysis equipment to see this stuff. You really need good gear, you need good equipment. People should be aware of the fact that these images, for example, can be interpolated into a digital image. So, if you've ever looked at one of those inaudible where they say if you look in your peripheral vision you may see this shape in what looks like chaos, and then you look and there's that shape. Or there is that picture of somebody's face there. And, in fact, this is done all the time. It's being done more and more as people are realizing it can be done, where subliminals are literally digitally inserted into the context of a picture on your television. It's not like somebody is holding up a card anymore. This is digitally interpolated into the actual matrix of that picture. See, Austin Fitts. For Let's Go to the Movie for tonight, I have encouraged people to watch La Femme Nikita. In the third season, one of the programs is called Under the Influence. She's a covert operator and they want her to pass herself off as the fiancée of this terrorist. So they put subliminal pictures of him in her apartment that redo his face to look like a guy she's in love with, so she falls in love with him or act like she's in love with him. It takes until the end of the show and she goes around her apartment and starts to see where they've put this sort of superimposed face in other pictures, and she ends up ripping all the art off the walls because it's all full of this entrainment stuff. It's a perfect example of just what you're describing. Adam Trombly, right. The entrainment to get you to be open, the entrainment to get you to have pleasure chemistries, and then the subliminal, that's the seed that gets planted. You smooth out the furrows of the brain, so to speak, you plow the eld and then you plant the seed. The seed is that subliminal, and that's exactly correct. See, Austin Fitts. In 1998 I took a course at a wonderful church in Washington. Spiritual warfare was the RST class, and then there was an advanced spiritual warfare class, and the instructors literally brought in DVDs and showed us how they put in a lower track, a sort of shish sound. And it's a subliminal message, and they literally sat there in class and sort of tried to teach us how we were being brainwashed with CDs and DVDs. They said to be very careful with what you're listening to, and you just need to know that there's all sorts of secret messages in this stuff. Adam Trombly, yes, this is subauditory, frequently. You can be in an environment that you can be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week entrained, and you'll never hear a sound unless somehow you can rid of all the traf-C noise and get rid of all the other noises that are ambient, because we are all in acoustic shock from the noise in our urban cities, and they're discovering that this stresses out the nervous system so that people are less and less able to function. The fact of the matter is that we can absolutely kick out the sound if you stop and listen in a very quiet room. And it is this sound of noise, not the benign old hiss of the needle on a vinyl record. It's a whole different kind of hiss, and that hiss is articulating things to our brain which we don't consciously hear. Our brain is incredibly fast, and an incredibly beautiful processor, and the brain actually connects the dots, whether we do consciously or not. And it connects the dots enough to get us to go buy a piece of tobacco gum when we don't smoke. In Colorado they are introducing that product right now. See, Austin Fitts. We're dancing to the hum. Adam Trombly, yes, we're dancing to the hum to a certain degree. See, Austin Fitz, one of the questions I get often on the Solari Report is, I can't seem to reach my family or my neighbors, or my colleagues, they won't listen to me. I just want to tell a story. I was trying to persuade a dear friend and neighbor to not let her grandkids eat junk foods, processed food, and to try and persuade her I gave her Supersize Me. Morgan Spurlock's wonderful documentary about how eating at McDonald's for 30 days almost killed himself. She watched it and she came over and said, "Oh my God, what have I been doing? I will never let the kids or the grandkids eat at McDonald's again." 3 weeks later I was taking her grandkids to a museum in Memphis and she looked at me said, "They're hungry, so why don't you stop at McDonald's and get them something to eat on the way?" And I realized she had completely forgotten. It was like her memory had been completely wiped. Now this is somebody who really cares about good nutrition and cares about her family. The idea that after 3 weeks she thinks it's nay to eat there, I couldn't even fathom it. Adam Trombly, it's the dumbing down of not just the American public, but the world public. It is the intentional dumbing down. And so, for example, Fukushima Daiichi goes off and everybody says this is like a really bad nuclear disaster and the Japanese government's in denial, and yet, somehow or other, here we are with it going off 24/7 and spewing incredible amounts of radioisotopes into the air, and people don't have the attention for it anymore. Same thing with the Gulf of Mexico, same thing with Supersize Me, and eating McDonald's and not eating McDonald's. I don't want to target McDonald's because I know they are selling salads and they really are trying to change their direction. This is an indication of the power we have as consumers, and we're always not just under this entrainment. I don't want to communicate some kind of fear and loathing here. We're not always going to be subject to this. We get tired of it. We can get, and even your friend, these people who saw something remarkable and then the next day they don't remember seeing it at all. It's always this thing with masked memories. It's so interesting how the masked memory works. It's such an important part of this conversation because there's a famous story where there was a sighting near the White House a few years ago, where this craft was just hovering there, and they scrambled jets and basically it just vanished, and a lot of people saw it. A lot of tourists took pictures of it, a lot of people videotaped it. It showed up on the Washington News, it showed up on the Baltimore Evening News. The next week at exactly the same time of day, and exactly the same location, from exactly the same camera angles that were broadcast on various stations, there was a plane that flew over and entered into restricted airspace near the White House and had to be escorted off by 2 F-18s. And this is like, what was it? This is a masked memory, and so what people remember is these two jerks somehow flew their Piper Cub into restricted airspace near the White House. How stupid are they? Oh my gosh, they were so stupid. And they completely forget that the week before at exactly the same time, exactly the same spot, there was something that the US government did not care to explain to its citizens. See, Austin Fitz, it's really funny, oftentimes you'll see a documentary come out that really does illuminate what's going on in a particular area. And then 6 to 12 months later Hollywood will put out a movie with the same name that completely takes the energy away. If you do a search, that's the one you pull up, not the other. Adam Trombly, exactly. A lot of science CT stuff will talk around these things. They actually go pretty close to saying some of the stuff that's actually happening. On the one hand, then they'll make it so ridiculous, then you feel like anybody who believes in that must be ridiculous. It's actually very intentional in some shows. There are other shows that were written differently that were more intelligent, and the corporate interests start saying, hey, wait a minute, we don't like the way this is written, you need to change this or else we're not going to sponsor your show anymore. Then you start seeing weird changes in the storylines in your favorite TV show that tell you that somebody doesn't want you to think about that. How many times have you heard a conversation about entrainment on television? See, Austin Fitz, last year we had Nick Begich come on to introduce HARP, and I want to go to things that are targeted in selected groups, but if you could say a minute or two on HARP and how it dovetails with mass mind control. Adam Trombly, there are two things I'd like to say, but before I start talking about HARP I want to mention a discovery that was made, not by me so much, but by John Lilly, who was a rather famous scientist staying with us in 1990 where my of CE was at the Institute. We had a sleeping loft above the of CE, and he climbed down one morning and I had just turned on this signal analyzer that I had going on anytime I was there, and there was a certain waveform that would appear on the screen of the signal analyzer. And the reason I'm saying this relative to HARP is because this is really important for everybody to hear, because where did that waveform come from? I'm going to try and describe it verbally. It had a hump, like you would expect a wave to have, and then it has a long pause, and then it has a dip, which is the other side of the wave, and then it has a long pause, and then it has a hump, etc., etc. Then John asked the question, where's that waveform from? I said, it's from the power grid, and he said, the power grid? And I said, yes, we had this hooked up to the harness of the house to neutral because we used the neutral loop as an antenna. And he said, oh, that's interesting. So this is actually on the power grid. Is it just at this house or is it at other places? And I said, no, we've measured it in several states. And he said, oh, that's really weird. I invented that waveform. He had actually invented the waveform to help control the behavior of dolphins in 1958-59 for the National Institute of Health project, under contract with the U.S. Navy. Basically they were implanting dolphins' brains and discovered that if they used just a pure sine wave that dolphins would go into epileptic seizures because they weren't giving their brains time to fully respond and integrate the information carried on that wave. So the pause, what we call response vector pause in the wave, and he said, oh my god, this is on the power grid. They are using my wave which I discovered, and I abandoned the program because I didn't like what we were doing to dolphins because I love dolphins. He was really having a hard time getting his head around the fact that this wave that he discovered was now being used through the power grid on everybody who uses utility power. We found this in state after state after state, and it's a very sophisticated form of entrainment. It's electromagnetic and it's coming through the harnesses of your house right now. I wish everybody could have isolation transformers and just edit it out. I'm mentioning this relative to HARP because we found this same waveform being broadcast by HARP, but what we found was being broadcast by HARP was much, much more sophisticated. In 1994, a colleague of mine, David Farnsworth, called me up one day in a very excited state. He said, you got to come here right away and see what I just discovered. After setting up the antennae myself because he wanted to make sure I trusted this information, and he wanted to make sure that I had a great level of confidence in it because as a scientist we just don't take these things for granted. This is a signal that we were analyzing on millions and millions of dollars worth of equipment that we had in our lab, and I got up there and looked at this screen, and not only did we ND the Lily waveform there, but we found the most amazing things interpolated into this signal. We found double helix signatures that look just like the DNA molecule, and we found other signatures that look like the DNA molecule, and it then being that waveform and that wave guide, and around that as the structure of the chromosome, etc., all being broadcast obviously for a reason. So, I suggested that this is being used somehow or other as a biological warfare weapon, and some women who came and interviewed me for Hole in the Sky, a documentary that they made, went and interviewed the guy who had invented this, under contract with the Department of Energy, and asked him if this was intentional, was it a biological warfare? He nally relaxed enough and acknowledged it. So HARP is a very complex beast. The initial funding Justy cation for HARP was to send an electromagnetic pulse into space that would mimic a nuclear detonation, so you could send an electromagnetic pulse against enemy warheads and shut them down, overwhelm their electronics, and burn them out so their guidance systems would fail and they would plummet into some other place than the target. That was one of the ways it was Justy ed to Congress. It poses as this research program in terms of atmospheric oral research. And it's insidious, because I wish it was just that. We were raided right after I published a paper on this, what we had discovered being broadcast by HARP, and we didn't discover this was in 1994, this was 17 years ago. We couldn't believe the richness of this signal, and I'm talking about extremely low frequency all the way up to 38 GHz. See, Austin Fitz, I hate to do this, but we have to move on. Adam Trombly, okay, but I just want to say that HARP is really a very sophisticated tool that they're using, and they coordinate that with the ground wave transmission system and what's coming across the harness of our homes. Get a spectrum analyzer, get a signal analyzer and hook. them up to ground and neutral, one that goes down to DC, and set your window at 0 to 10 Hz even. Go from 0 to 100 kHz and you'll see the lily wave across the spectrum. It's a remarkable thing to see. See, Austin Fitts, needless to say, there's a lot that's happening invisibly. Unfortunately, it can be very harmful. Let me jump ahead to the dovetail of chemicals and drugs. One of the important things to understand about this kind of technology is the more chemicals you take into your body, the more susceptible you become. If you want to reduce your susceptibility and increase your discernment, obviously keeping those chemicals out is really important. If we could just touch on uride and some of the prescription drugs people need to be aware of. Adam Trombly, the number one thing is, don't drink the water. And, don't think that your charcoal LTER is going to get rid of the uride, because it's not. The very best charcoal LTERs will reduce it slightly, but it's not getting rid of your uride. Reverse osmosis will go a long way towards that, but we recommend that everybody just drink at least reverse osmosis water, or smart water or something that doesn't have uride added into it. If you want to brush your teeth with uride toothpaste, that's up to you, but it's basically a poison. A trace amount might increase the strength of the enamel in your teeth, but you can forget about it otherwise. The thing about uride molecule is because so many people have it in their systems, you can target it with the broadcast from HARP, for example, or with a broadcast from a ground wave transmission system or a broadcast through the television. You can literally send a signal acoustically, visually, electromagnetically through the air that makes the uride more potent in its function, which is ridiculous because we're already ingesting 4 times past toxic levels. And now they're reducing that amount, but they're not taking it out of our water. Fluoride is there to control us, period. The ADA can go on and on about how this is good for our teeth, but there are other things you can do for your teeth. You don't have to be poisoning the rest of your body, making yourself complicated in all kinds of ways. So, uride is a very specific targeted molecule of this program. And then you have the common antidepressants. The whole spectrum of common antidepressants can be individually targeted on a molecule-by-molecule basis. If you have a tragic event, you can broadcast this. After the Los Angeles earthquake many years ago, there were friends and colleagues I worked with through Project Earth for years and years, who I still work with now, and they went out and did samples of the water and discovered that heavy doses of antidepressants were being put into these tanks where people were going and getting their water bottles LLED, and then there were broadcasts going on simultaneously. This is very Orwellian, it's beyond Orwell. He didn't even have the imagination for this. This is way beyond what he imagined. So, very specifically, if you watch the news you're going to be depressed, so you might as well take an antidepressant. Now they're trying to get the FDA to approve drugs that wipe out your memory intentionally. And they say it's really good for PTSD sufferers. Well, HemiSync can take a PTSD sufferer through the experience of the trauma in such a way that they can through to the other side of it. I've seen this with my own eyes many times. I've seen people get remarkable healings from a week of immersion in intentional benign healing synchronization or healing entrainment. When you get into this other thing, you're talking about things that make you dumber. All of a sudden you go, geez, I'm only 38 years old and I'm having a really hard time remembering anything. There's a certain point where we all start noticing that we are not operating optimally, we are not operating at our full capacity, and we're taking all of these things that we take for granted, like in our processed foods there's all kinds of weird things. When we drink wine, it still has sultates in it, and being somebody who loves good wine, it's like if it has sultates in it, the sultates are there to inhibit oxidation in such a way that they control the fermentation process. There are naturally occurring sultates in wine, and sultates are another chemical that are systematically targeted with this kind of entrainment. It prevents the oxidation or the metabolization of the alcohol, so you stay drunk longer and you have more toxic metabolites and you end up having a hangover. It just goes on and on. MSG. Here's another huge one. MSG is a neurotoxin which the FDA continues to say is okay, even though there's hundreds of studies that have shown that MSG is very a dangerous chemical indeed, and it's still in our food, so you avoid it. You demand that the food manufacturers stop using it. See, Austin Fitts, the bottom line is, between the food, the water and the prescription drugs, and with the electromagnetics, you're creating a cocktail which is very dangerous. You don't have to buy into the cocktail. A lot of these things you can prevent yourself. There is a way to prevent the cocktail, but also to understand there are people who haven't and they're really in a different physical state that you are. Adam Trombly, these are the relatives we have a hard time reaching. I'm blessed to have relatives that are pretty facile in this area. Pray for those you love and pray for their awakening. See, Austin Fitts, financial applications. This is what I really want to get down to. A lot of what we've covered sort of leads up to this. As an investment advisor, somebody who's dealt with financial fraud a lot, I see this being used to encourage people to not think clearly when it comes to their money. I want to start off with a story. I was with you, and you were giving me an education on entrainment technology and how it's used on the TV. I don't know if you remember, we were watching the Bachelorette and Survivor programs and you were giving me a little education, and it was on that trip that we also went swimming with the whales. It was the only time in my life I've ever been in the presence of a whale, and it really is a life-changing event. I remember as we were sailing back, I literally couldn't talk for about an hour. I just had to kind of compute the communication that had just happened and the feeling you have when you are in their presence. I was with the whales, you gave me my little TV, entrainment and subliminal programming education, and then I went to the Gold Conference in New Orleans, and I had read stories of some of the Enron presentations. The presentation itself had been quite mediocre, but the analyst walked out saying this company was fantastic. And after reading the descriptions I said, I think they were using entrainment technology, and subliminal programming is the only way I can explain it. So I open the ballroom doors, Dick Armey is speaking and then George Tenet is going to speak on national security to these gold investors. There are about 1,000 people in the ballroom and I open the doors and I get hit with this wave of massive pleasure, but it's like a synthetic version of how the whales made me feel. It was very interesting. I walk in and I think, oh my God, they are using entrainment technology and I'd never experience anything this strong. It was very strong. I walked over and sat down next to someone I knew, and I thought I really have to keep careful discipline because this is very strong. And I'm taking notes and Dick Armey's talking and what he's saying is not very impressive, but suddenly I drop my pen and I start clapping with everyone else, and I said to someone next to me, isn't he wonderful? And then I look at my hands and say, what am I doing? What am I saying? I was that suggestible even though I knew it was happening. So I thought, I can't stop thinking about it. I need to control my mind. Anyway, George Tenet, who just resigned as the head of the CIA, comes in and gives a speech, and the whole point of his speech is the importance of integrating between enforcement and intelligence. It's unbelievably strong. The whole feeling you felt was so wonderful, like you just had massive amounts of champagne, ridden a bicycle 100 miles, you just felt on top of the world. Then they were taking questions and I walked up and they handed me the microphone and I said, how do you do, Mr. Tenet? Of course he knows who I am. I'm Catherine Austin Fitts, can you explain how it was that the Air Force stood down 4 times on 9/11? And he went into a state of complete shock because you could tell that the reason they felt comfortable taking questions was because whatever they were doing was so strong. The last thing he expected was a really tough question. So he didn't handle it very well. Needless to say, it sort of got people out of that state of pleasure. But I saw it there, and I thought, if you did this on a political speech? This was an investment conference, and you could see that they were trying to influence 1,000+ significant gold investors. And that's when I realized this could really have a powerful impact on Nance's and financial fraud. Adam Trombly, that kind of anecdote is exactly what's needed. People can relate to this in so many ways. We've all had situations where we can't understand why we're feeling so good. I didn't take anything, I didn't drink anything, and I think this guy is the greatest guy ever. If you're feeling that way about Governor Perry, you better check yourself. See, Austin Fitts, I would like to point out that entrainment technology was not enough to get George W. Bush elected, they needed computer fraud too. Adam Trombly, voting machines, which we fought against so hard, and somehow or other, they kind of traded the system anyway. They are all over the place. Even though we know they can be manipulated. See, Austin Fitz, one of the questions we got is, praying that you can give us real examples of what the techniques are so we can recognize them. Is it public knowledge that casino pump out oxygen to increase gambling? I didn't know that. Have you ever heard that? Adam Trombly, oh yes. There are all kinds of things casinos do. I have a friend who's an expert in it, but I'm not. There's nightly a constant broadcast going on. You can go in with a high-resolution digital recorder, take it someplace where somebody knows how to see a signal and just look for repeating wave forms and look for them in the alpha range, look for them in the stimulation pleasure areas of the brain. People who are scientists or engineers who are listening to this who want somebody to check what I'm saying and what you're saying about this, hook up your instrumentation to the cable of your television, hook up your instrumentation to the harness of your house, and see for yourself what's happening in terms of entrainment. This is not rocket science, but it's very sophisticated. See, Austin Fitz, let me move on to another kind of financial fraud issue. One of the things I've noticed is that certain internet radio shows focused on investment, particularly precious metals, are using this kind of technology through the internet to push, for example, gold going to the moon, gold going to $12,500. They have all these wild scenarios, but their sites are always juicy and you feel a lot of resonation that you don't in a lot of the other sites. Is my intuition legitimate? Adam Trombly, yes, it is. If you go to a website with music playing, turn off the sound, is my recommendation. With a website where there is music playing, there is no entrainment being used, but you can turn off the sound. The fact is that yes, it can be done over the internet, it can be done over your computer, just as easily as anything else. It's something that you intermodulate with the signal. It's not your imagination. They can make people feel like that. That gold will be some ridiculous price, that is even beyond what it's really worth. The fact is that they can convince you that something that you know is bad for you is actually good for you. This happens all the time. Gold may go up to $12,000 and it may not. In the same way these people can do this pump and dump, which you illuminated us when you sat down with Nancy and I all those years ago, and informed us of what was really happening in the marketplace in ways we had no idea about. People are stimulated to buy something, buy. And they literally know that a signal that they squeak through a certain window of frequencies can create a pleasure sensation in your body, as we talked about over and over again tonight. And it's pleasurable. Right now it's gold, so let's pump gold up, and then they have the other signal that says sell, and all of a sudden there's anxiety. So they get people to sell, to buy, it's like puppets on a string. See, Austin Fitz, with precious metals my whole position has always been, I don't know how to day trade it. It's a long-term market. Let's buy, let's hold, and let's just stick with the primary trend, and there are interim pumps and dumps along the way, and one of the things that's interesting is, an effort will be made to get everybody to sell their gold, and suddenly I have a rash of subscribers and clients calling or emailing. It's too much in concert. When they're running up and it's not the time to buy, it's the time to wait, and you'll get the same kind of pressure, and you can see these campaigns going on and you wonder if they're using subliminal programming because it's too strong, it's too much, it makes me nervous. Adam Trombly, right, and then they continue to sell paper gold, which is a whole other subject. See, Austin Fitz, one other pattern that really makes me nervous, because I've experienced it, is the use in conjunction with the telephone to market either an investment or a person who then persuades you to go along with that investment. You're falling prey to the technology and not to the investment that's attractive. How do they do it over the phone? I don't understand how that works. Adam Trombly, same thing. It's always a simple process of frequency entrainment. One of the RST places I saw it in my own life, entrainment being used over the phone, when I was CEO and president of a computer company in the early 80s, and I started noticing a weird thing happening when I was on the phone, and I had some friends come over from UC Berkeley and they brought their instrumentation and they tested my phone line and said, holy mackerel, there's these entrainment carriers on your phone line. So it just came across the same way, sub-audio, subconscious, and dictating my state of mind. There were people who wanted me to be compliant with certain programs they had in their agenda, and I turned out to be a bad candidate, like your listener who doesn't get hypnotized easily. We don't have to be hypnotized. Let's be really clear about that. See, Austin Fitts, I think the key with investments is to always sleep on it and do the math. Math is a wonderful tool, do the numbers. I constantly say to my clients, you can't be too careful about the quality of the people you do business with, and you really want to be very careful over a multi-year period and do business with people you trust. Or the people you know and trust. Between math and careful networking, you can protect yourself from a lot of it. I think that step number 1 is knowing that it exists and knowing that you really need to do your homework and have intellectual mastery of what you're doing and why you're doing it. Intuition is wonderful, but you have to sleep on it with this kind of technology around. Adam Trombly, thank God that you're telling the truth about this. I really want to say this to you and all your listeners. I really am grateful that you are speaking the truth about what's actually happening. I've seen the impact on people who cheer you when you say the way that this is organized, it's really organized crime. The people in the United States have just had more than $15 trillion stolen from us just by a sleight of hand, by both Republican and Democratic administrations. I think it's extremely important, and thank God for you, because you're the only person I know who's really telling the truth about this. And I thank you for that. See, Austin Fitts, I appreciate it, but I'm still trying to ND the truth. Adam Trombly, that's the beautiful thing about it. Anybody who's got any wisdom at all knows that the RST thing you've got to do in the morning is say, I don't know exactly what's going on. Everyday Plato said the RST step on the path of wisdom is the confession of ignorance. And every morning I wake up and I remind myself that I don't know everything. There's so much I don't know, it's embarrassing. See, Austin Fitts, I just can't get over the fact that we live on this planet struggling as we do, and we know 3% of what there is to know and understand about how our planet works. Let's just run through a recap of some of the things people can do. Anybody who knows me knows that the RST things I say is, turn off your TV, eat fresh food, and bank local. I've never met a local community bank that uses entrainment technology, ever. Maybe there's a RST. Adam Trombly, a lot of those community banks are being bought out now. There's a lot of that going on. See, Austin Fitts, I think if we are really careful and discerning about all media, just be aware that this problem exists. The other thing that I found out is that nature helps out tremendously. If I can keep resonating with the cows and the birds and the trees and stay close to nature. Sometimes this can be stronger in an urban environment. Adam Trombly, absolutely. Remember all the times you felt totally enervated from being in an urban environment, and you've gone off to hike somewhere in the forest, and half an hour after you stop hiking, all of a sudden you feel like you're alive, because we resonate on the molecular level with every living thing. We are literally like living tuning forks. We walk through a forest and the vibratory context of those trees, which are living crystal structures resonating in space, those interact with us in a way that can go a long way towards erasing the negative effects. We really all need to breathe living air as much as possible. We need to drink living water as much as possible. These things are essential. We do green drinks in a 3-horsepower blender out of the whole fruit and the whole vegetable so that we get all of the beer and not just the juice. It's amazing how healing this kind of thing is. Diet, water, what you drink, what you don't drink, what you smoke, what you don't smoke, etc. I recommend nobody smokes anything, but what do I know? See, Austin Fitts, we were talking about how this kind of technology really cuts you off from the divine intelligence and how it's important to understand there really is a spiritual war going on. Adam Trombly, it's really important. We need to have control of own feeling breath. See, Austin Fitts, right. And then Nally, this kind of technology can be used by me to make myself smarter and freer, and it can be used for positive purposes. When we had Dr. Begich on, he talked about that as well. Adam Trombly, it's extremely important. See, Austin Fitts, the quantum resonance system is an example of that. Adam Trombly, it's an extraordinary example of that, and there's still a lot of good material out in places like the Monroe Institute. There's some other stuff that isn't so good that has subliminals in it, too. We do have remedies, and the main thing that I always say, as I just said a minute ago. But I want to make sure I say it clearly, and that we all have control of our feeling breath. Whatever our belief system happens to be, the fact is that the divine is innately present everywhere. This isn't from one tradition or another tradition, this is just reality, in terms of the kind of energy work that we do. With technologies tapping into the 0-point inuctuation background ELD, we are tapping into something that pervades all time and space, and every single person listening here, and we all have access to this ELD. It isn't dictated to by any organization. You don't have to belong to a specie church to have access to the Buddha nature or to God. See, Austin Fitz, do you know what Curtis Mayeld said? He said, "You don't need a ticket, you just need to get on board." Adam Trombly, amen to that. I hear that. See, Austin Fitz, there is a lot we can do, but I have to say the single most important thing is that we just need to know it exists. One of the things I would really encourage everyone, whenever you turn on a piece of equipment, whether it's a TV, or it's the internet, or your utilities, or you do business with anyone, or you listen to an ad from anybody, you just need to understand what are their incentives. Are there incentives to control you, or are there incentives to sell you something that makes them money? Or are there incentives to help you be freer and healthier, and richer and more successful? And we need to do everything we can to keep away from people who don't have our best interest at heart and align ourselves with people or organizations who really do want to see us succeed. I think part of being successful in dealing with this stuff is just moving away from people who don't have our best interest at heart and surrounding ourselves with people and organizations that do have our best interest at heart. I know in my life it makes a huge difference. And it's one of the reasons I associate with you, Adam. Adam Trombly, I know that in the last election a lot of people had the illusion that they were seizing control of our democracy again. This is just a perfect example of, it wasn't the soap they were selling. We need to immunize each other, keep each other on track, we need to extend ourselves in such a way that we can join in our mutual intelligence and somehow resurrect this Lazarus of a democracy of ours, because it's kind of rotting in the tomb right now and we need to tell it to get out of the tomb and come into the light. We really need to say that to ourselves too. See, Austin Fitz, at the end of They Live, which really is a dreadful B-grade movie, at the end when they turn the entrainment off everybody comes out of the trance and that's when real solutions begin. Adam Trombly, let's pray that somebody helps us come out of the trance. See, Austin Fitz, thank you again for joining us on the Solari Report. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
The fact that these things, I mean, look at this. They are saturating the United States, especially my side of the country. And I think we found the reason for it, and it's pretty straightforward. This is a patent right here for nervous system manipulation by electromagnetic fields from monitors. Now, what does that mean? It means just what it sounds like. Here's a few diagrams from the patent. Do you see this? Does it make any sense now why they need everyone to have the highest resolution possible flat screen in their home? Why is it that that's all a rage? Why is it that they have gone through great pains in keeping people sitting in front of their televisions, laptops, computers, and cell phones? These people have tricked us into bringing these things into our own homes. And there's a reason when people sit there, especially the elderly and especially the young, they are hypnotized. Do you know why? Because they've been working on this since the 50s. This is an old patent. This was published on the 2003. This has been around for a long, long time. 1992, 1991, 1953. This goes back and back and back. The television wasn't invented to entertain people. The television was their first attempt at actually talking to the other side. That's exactly what they were trying to do, and they discovered that they could use it as a happy thing to keep people distracted full time. It's amazing. People see something on television and it's like the words of God. And then, method and apparatus for manipulating nervous system, filed in 97, granted in 98. Here's another one, thermal excitation of sensory resonances, filed in 95, patented in 98. Manipulation of nervous systems, 97, 99, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. Well, let me show you something really crazy. This is going to freak you out. Watch this.
Hello, Earth. So good to see you. Seeing me. We know you find TV irresistible. And Hulu. Yeah. Now follow me. Below the curtain.
Now, for copyright reasons, I'm not going to play this entire video, but I'm going to play the ending of it so you can understand what they're telling you over and over. We all remember these creepy Hulu commercials, right? Alec Baldwin, this guy, all sorts of people.
Favorite place, everywhere. You see, this is your brain on TV. This is your brain on Hulu. So close. And this is your brain on Hulu Plus.
Now, what he just basically said is the television's definitely doing everybody in. Most of us, including myself, have walked away from television entirely. But we spend a majority of our time on laptops, cell phones, and other black mirrored computational devices, correct? Listen to what he's got to say.
And this is your brain with a little sprig of mint. Hulu Plus.
That's hot.
An eviler plot to destroy the world. Enjoy.
And then, of course, you've got the ad with Alec Baldwin, and he basically says the same thing, that television wasn't quite doing the brain in quick enough, so they had to spread it out, and that they did it all for free. And they keep going and going and going, and at the very end, he says the same thing.
Because we're aliens, and that's how we roll.
Now, they just told you that this was an evil plot to destroy the world, and they're telling you everything straight up, but people are couching this in a way that it's, it's comedy. It's no big deal. Hulu. You see that? Hulu. Remember that name. Hulu, right? Look at the name of the guy that actually made all these electromagnetic fields, all these manipulation devices for monitors and other means, television, cell phones, laptops, the gas station monitors. His name is Hendrikus Lu, or Hulu, because his co-workers called him Who for short. Hulu. Hulu. You think I'm wrong? You think I'm kidding? You think it's too far of a stretch? Well, now I can prove it. Here's a forum that somebody sent me a link to. Now, this guy has credentials, big credentials. It's no joke. I'm not going to show everything, but I'm going to show you enough so you can understand what I'm talking about. The guy that wrote this is Dr. A. True Ott, PhD. Hulu, a quantum leap in electronic mind control and manipulation. Hulu is the new digital high-def interface between homes, computers, and television networks. They would like you to believe this is all wonderful and completely free. Don't be fooled. Nothing is free. Somebody is paying billions of dollars to bring this technology home to you. And that's a fact. It's entirely, completely free, yet they have all of the best stars, so forth and so on, and they tell you exactly what it is they're doing.
An evil plot to destroy the world. Enjoy.
And right here, Alex states the obvious over and over.
I mean, what are you going to do, turn off your TV and your computer? I mean, what are you going to do, turn off your TV and your computer? I mean, what are you going to do, turn off your TV and your computer?